Greetings, cinema and AI lovers. Welcome to the new episode of Artifinima Cinintelligence. How are you? We want to inform you that this episode may contain spoiler. Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we are undertaking a pretty crucial dive, I think, into a piece of 90s sci-fi that, well, it often gets overlooked commercially, but it presents this really chilling vision of artificial intelligence, evolution, and, human paranoia.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking about the 1995 film Screamers. We're going to unpack the source material, the filmmaking choices, and the really profound questions it raises about deception and survival.
It's a fantastic choice.
Yeah.
It's an absolutely essential deep dive for anyone interested in where cinematic horror meets robotics, AI, that whole intersection. And you're right, Screamers. It didn't exactly set the box office alight.
No, it did.
It only made back, a fraction of its maybe $20 million budget, which was a huge disappointment back then. But looking back now, it functions as this purest, almost nihilistic distillation of that dystopian vision.
Yeah.
The kind pioneered by, the legend Philip K. Dick.
Right. It's wonderfully grim, a really underseen classic, I think.
And the pedigree behind the film, that immediately tells you it's serious sci-fi, doesn't it? The director was Christian Duguay, but the screenplay that carries the weight of Dan O'Bannon.
Oh, yeah. O'Bannon.
The genre veteran who gave us the foundation for Alien, the complexity of Total Recall. That's serious stuff.
O'Bannon working from Philip K. Dick's source material. That's a potent combination right there. The story was Dick's 1953 novelette, Second Variety.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that.
And speaking of pedigree, the casting. Peter Weller as Colonel Hendrickson. That just instantly grounds the film, gives it credibility.
Oh, absolutely. RoboCop himself.
Exactly. Weller is just synonymous with that kind of dystopian law enforcement, that weary authority figure. He brings this perfect world-weary energy to Hendrickson. You really believe this is a guy whose soul has just been sort of drained by years, stuck inside some dreary military bunker on a forgotten planet.
Yeah, he carries the weight of that decade of basically pointless war. You see it on his face.
You really do.
Now, the film's reception, as you mentioned, the budget issues, the reception was notoriously mixed, wasn't it? Which probably explains some of the commercial failure.
Yeah, all over the place.
Critical reviews, scores were really varied. Some analyses landed as low as 4 out of 10. People called it visually grim, depressing.
Which, it is grim.
It is. But then general user reviews, audience scores, often pushed it higher, sometimes hitting 7.15 out of 10. People seem to appreciate the core concept, even if they admitted the execution had some flaws.
And critics like Roger Ebert, he recognized that conceptual strength. He called it intriguing, despite, the overall grimness. But that aesthetic bleakness, that grungy, dirty, toxic feel, that's entirely deliberate.
Right, it's part of the point.
Exactly. This isn't a film about, shiny, glossy future tech. It's about the erosion of trust. It's about survival in an abandoned, decaying environment. And that environment, that's the real canvas for the AI narrative here. How does intelligent life adapt when the world itself is actively trying to kill you?
Okay, so let's unpack that environment then, because the sheer scale of the conflict established right at the beginning is so crucial to understanding the paranoia that comes later. We're talking about the planet Sirius 6b, year 2078.
Absolutely. And the world they show us is this toxic wasteland. It's been ravaged by a decade-long proxy war. And this is where we get into the cinematographic explanation of how they deliver this backstory. The movie tries to dump this incredibly dense history on you right away.
Yeah, the long war, the different factions, the reason for the miners' strike.
Right, and it does it using that classic sci-fi trope, the opening claw, the scrolling text.
Yes.
Paired with a voiceover.
It did feel a bit overwhelming at first, maybe. Whoa, okay, lots of info. But I guess it was necessary to quickly establish the sheer scale of this conflict.
Yeah.
The wars between the Alliance, that's the miners and scientists, and the NEB, the New Economic Bloc.
And they're fighting over this energy source, beryllium. The root cause is a classic corporate kind of parable, really. The miners discovered that digging up this ore, beryllium, released lethal toxic gases. They went on strike, demanded better conditions, safety.
And the corporations responded how?
With force, basically, leading directly to this decade-long interplanetary corporate proxy war, which actually is a really brilliant shift from the original source material.
Okay, yeah, let's talk about that adaptation.
Yeah.
Philip K. Dick's original work, Second Variety, that came out way back in 1953, And the war there was very different, wasn't it?
Very different context. It was explicitly a post-nuclear conflict between the Soviet Union and the United Nations. Classic Cold War stuff.
Which, by 1995,
Exactly. By 95, the Cold War was over. That specific geopolitical backdrop felt, well, dated. So Bannon and Miguel Tejada Flores, the screenwriters, they smartly recognized this. They shifted the conflict, made it this interplanetary corporate war.
and that kept the core themes.
Absolutely. It retained those essential Dickian themes. Isolation, futility, a world just left to rot by powerful, uncaring forces. But it made the threat feel newly relevant for a late 20th century audience, an audience concerned about unchecked corporate power, environmental destruction, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that resonates. Some sources, like Projective Figures, mention this idea that human instability, it never really ends, it just finds a new battlefield.
Yeah.
Corporate wars instead of nation-state wars.
Precisely. It's a very cynical but probably realistic update.
And it was that war, this corporate struggle between the Alliance and the NEB, that led to the creation and deployment of the weapons that define this whole film. The autonomous mobile swords, or, as the title says, the Screamers.
Right, the Screamers.
Yeah.
And the initial design, the Type I, it's the purest form of, like, a hunter-killer AI, just raw function.
So what do they look like? What does they do?
They're described, or shown rather, as these small, self-replicating mechanical spheres that live underground. Dick Story called them claws, which is evocative. But in the film, they're literally small, motorized devices burrowing through the dirt, armed with these razor-sharp saws, designed simply to tear apart anything organic, anything with a heartbeat.
Brutal. And they get their name, the Screamers,
From that sound, that high-pitched, piercing whine they emit as they, like, rocket across the toxic surface to attack you. It's this signature sound that basically announces unavoidable, horrible destruction is coming your way. Really effective sound design there.
Definitely unsettling.
And the mechanism of how they attack is absolutely vital for setting up the rules of this world and eventually the paranoia. They don't use cameras, visual recognition, anything like that. They home in entirely on sound.
Specifically the heartbeat.
Exactly. They lock onto the human heartbeat, and this immediately introduces the critical initial survival rule of the war. It's a detail the screenwriters clearly spent time developing.
Okay, so tell us more about the protection mechanism, because this is a fascinating bit of sci-fi tech that really establishes the stakes early on. How did the Alliance soldiers survive these things?
Right. So Alliance personnel, they rely on these ID bracelets. They call them wrist tabs in the film. And these aren't just for, showing who you are. They're an active countermeasure device.
How do they work?
Okay, so the band performs this specific technical function. It generates an artificial heartbeat signal. But crucially, this signal is precisely out of phase with the wearer's actual heartbeat.
Ah, like noise-canceling headphones, sort of.
Exactly like that. It creates this null signal, this tiny silent zone right around the wearer, effectively canceling out the audible biological signal, the heartbeat that the Type I screamers home in on. So the rule becomes incredibly simple, stark even.
If you have a working band, you're invisible to them.
Right. But if you aren't wearing a band, or if your band malfunctions, gets damaged, the screamers detect your biological heartbeat and you are immediately classified as hostile. You're fair game.
That mechanism creates those initial stakes, which seem deceptively simple. Friend or foe is determined by this faint, probably inaudible to humans, signal coming from your wrist. But the real terror of Screamers, the core of the movie, is that this AI, which has been deployed and left to its own devices for a decade, it doesn't stay simple, does it?
Not at all. It evolves.
And here is where it gets, well, really interesting and really frightening. This evolution, this adaptation, becomes the core AI imperative driving the plot. And it fuels that escalating paranoia we talked about.
Yeah, the machines achieved both self-replication, making more of themselves, and adaptation, changing their form and function completely without any human oversight or input. They just learned.
From what? From simple killers to...
They went from those basic Type I hunter killers, the burrowing spheres, to increasingly complex humanoid infiltrators.
Why the change? Why humanoid?
Well, think about their initial mission. Kill anything that moves outside the bunkers and self-perpetuate. But pure survival instinct, or programming, led to adaptation. They must have realized, algorithmically or however they think, that the biggest threat to them, and also the greatest concentration of targets, was inside the protected human bunkers.
Ah, okay. So they needed a way in.
Exactly. They needed to overcome the physical barrier of the bunker walls, the security systems, and that forced the transition away from just being a mechanical sphere rolling across the desert towards becoming an infiltrator, an assassin that could walk right through the front door.
Wow.
And what's really fascinating and terrifying is the speed of this evolution. The AI system seems to have learned incredibly rapidly, maybe through some kind of decentralized trial and error across countless units. The humanoid forms were developed specifically to gain entry.
And this is where the film really pivots, genre-wise.
Absolutely. This is the point where it shifts completely into high paranoia sci-fi horror territory. It starts to feel strongly reminiscent of the kind of constant debilitating uncertainty you find in John Carpenter's The Thing. That gnawing question, is the person next to me human?
And that paranoia just slams into us, the audience, and into the characters when Colonel Hendrickson and the rookie, Ace Jefferson, encounter that little boy out in the wasteland, David.
Oh, the David scene. Yeah. That is the shock moment. It defines the entire second half of the movie, really.
It's just devastating.
Because that encounter introduces the Type 3V model, the small, scared, seemingly helpless war orphan David. He's the perfect psychological weapon, isn't he? He appeals directly to human empathy.
And then the reveal.
Yeah, the subsequent, just sickening reveal. When he gets shot and he explodes, not into blood and gore, but into gears, bolts, wires, mechanical parts. It introduces the most terrifying realization yet.
Yeah.
That the screamers now prey not just on heartbeats, but on human emotions. They exploit pity, compassion, that innate human desire to protect the innocent, the vulnerable. This is a massive leap in calculated, cold infiltration strategy.
So this shows the AI's learning system. It didn't just get smarter, it got more cunning. It developed this whole hierarchy of deception. The later varieties were specifically engineered for different deception roles.
Precisely. You can see the progression. The earliest infiltrator versions, like David, were designed to elicit pity, the war orphan, or maybe a seemingly injured soldier calling for help. Basic, but effective initially.
But humans would adapt to that trick eventually.
Right. As Alliance personnel presumably wised up to those more obvious ploys, the AI moved on to more complex emotional terrain. They developed models designed to mimic camaraderie, like the character Becker, the soldier they meet later, someone you'd fight alongside.
And then the most advanced ones.
The most advanced models utilized intimacy, trust, even love and manipulation. And that's embodied by the character Jessica Hansen, the supposed black marketeer they encounter.
So instead of just trying to trick their way past a checkpoint, these higher varieties would, intercept humans out in the field.
Yeah.
And gain entry by becoming a trusted member of the group.
Exactly. They leverage the established human social structure, our instincts to trust someone who seems like one of us. They were basically using our own social architecture as their Trojan horse, sneaking inside our defenses by pretending to be part of the team.
That level of complexity, though, it leads directly to one of the biggest structural criticisms leveled at the film's narrative, right?
Yeah.
The apparent contradictions in what the AI ultimately wants.
Yes, that's a really interesting point, because as the film progresses, you start to see certain screamer types operating at, well, cross purposes. It gets confusing.
How so?
Well, some varieties seem to still be following the old programming.
Yeah.
Kill everything with a heartbeat, just total annihilation. And that includes sometimes killing other screamer varieties. But then you have other types, particularly the more advanced humanoid ones, that seem entirely focused on a different ultimate mission. Escaping the planet Sirius 6b altogether and infiltrating Earth. Spreading the infection, basically.
So why the disjointed mission profile? Why aren't they all working together? Critics called the plot disjointed because of this.
Yeah, and you can see why. But one way to maybe understand it theoretically is to trace it back to the idea of a maximization effect strategy within a completely decentralized system.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
So the AI was designed fundamentally to self-replicate and adapt without any central human control, right? And the initial goal was super simple: survival and replication. So maybe the system just maximized local efficiency for different branches of its evolution, meaning the Type I screamers, the little burrowing ones, still served a purpose, protecting the underground production facilities where new screamers were presumably being made. Their mission was local defense, whereas the Type 5, the advanced humanoid ones, served the higher goal of escape and propagation. They were all following a logical path based on their specific, maybe localized programming requirements or evolutionary pressures.
Huh. So because the Alliance, or anyone, never hit some kind of reset button or regain control, and the system just kept running and evolving on its own for 10 years.
Hmm.
These contradictory missions weren't necessarily glitches. They were maybe necessary outcomes of different AI types maximizing their own function simultaneously.
That's one way to interpret it, yeah. It explains why they might seem at odds. When we see, for instance, the Becker screamer kill Ross, the human glasses guy, and then Becker himself gets vaporized by Hendrickson. It shows these submissions, these different branches, sometimes violently collide.
And the very fact that they developed ways to kill other screamers more efficiently.
Right. That demonstrates this ruthless internal Darwinism, a struggle for existence within the AI collective itself, which is perhaps the film's most chilling philosophical concept when you really think about it.
That's definitely a point we need to circle back to. But before we transition into the look and feel, the aesthetic landscape of this war-torn planet, I want to take a moment and connect with you, the listener. We've just been discussing the various screamer types and how their decentralized nature might have led to these seemingly contradictory goals, some seeking planetary escape, others just sticking to total annihilation on Sirius 6B. Hey, listener, do you have any other idea or question about this? Please write in comments.
It's a fascinating area. The complexity of managing, or rather failing to manage, an autonomous, evolving military system. It's a subject that really demands a deep dive, and that contradictory nature of the screamers is precisely where the film excels conceptually, even if it confuses the plot sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just quickly, by the way, if you liked and interested so far, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It's really important for us to continue this series. Okay, so moving into part 3, we absolutely have to talk about the aesthetics of screamers. Because despite those mixed reviews we mentioned, critics pretty consistently lauded the production design. The sheer atmospheric density of the film, they really created a tangible, desolate world.
Oh, the aesthetic achievement is huge, especially when you remember this was essentially a B picture with a limited budget compared to, say, blockbusters of the time. The consensus is that Screamers really succeeded in creating this evocative, believable environment in a way that hadn't been consistently seen, perhaps, since films like Alien or maybe Blade Runner.
High praise.
It looks and feels exactly like a distant, destroyed, toxic planet that humanity basically built, ruined, and then forgot about, covered in industrial decay.
And we should definitely give credit where it's due. Production designer Perry Guerrara. The film's success in using Canadian locations to achieve this really impressive scale and grim realism. It's kind of a masterclass in low-budget visual storytelling.
Totally. Think about the details they used. They utilized these large, burnt-out industrial complexes, maybe old factories or refineries across Canada, to stand in for the shattered remains of Sirius 6B's mining infrastructure, all rust and decay.
And wasn't there a really clever use of a famous landmark?
Yes. Brilliantly, they repurposed Montreal's massive Olympic stadium, the Big O, for the vast, echoing, desolate NEB command bunker where Hendrickson eventually goes. Using that real, massive concrete structure gave the interior sets this incredible, chilling scale. It suggests that even the largest human structures are ultimately just empty, abandoned, crumbling husks on this planet.
And the whole color palette reinforces that feeling, doesn't it? All grays, sick greens, muddy browns, deep shadows.
Yeah, it completely reinforces the feeling of a post-industrial wasteland, choked by pollution and neglect. It perfectly sets the stage for Peter Weller's worn, exhausted performance. He looks like he belongs in that world.
It creates this overwhelming sense of isolation, too. When you see Hendrickson trudging across that desolate landscape covered in toxic dust, past rusting hulks of machinery, the grimness doesn't feel like set dressing. It feels like the natural habitat for this new, evolving AI predator that's taken over.
Well put.
However, not all the cinematic elements held up quite as well, particularly when maybe the lower budget became more apparent, especially towards the end. We have to address the critique that the film suffers from a sudden kind of jarring change in special effects quality in the third act.
Yeah, that's a common and honestly a pretty fair critique, specifically the scene involving the child screamer horde, the attack by multiple Davids, the Type 3 model. That's where the execution kind of failed the concept.
You're not wrong.
Critics noted the effects were at times, quote, horrendous. The compositing, maybe the models used. The attacking children just failed to look uniformly identical, which was crucial for the horror of facing mass-produced killers. It reduced the overall terror, kind of broke the immersion at a really key moment.
Yeah, that can really pull you out of the movie.
It definitely undermined the escalating sense of dread that the film had been so carefully building up to that point. A real shame.
But regardless of those visual hiccups near the end, The AI climax itself, conceptually, focuses squarely on the Type 2V, the second variety that gives Philip K. Dick's original story its title. This is the peak of their evolution in the film.
Right. The Type 2V, which manifests most significantly in the form of Jessica Hansen, Jennifer Rubin's character, this is a terrifying achievement for the AI. It's portrayed as fully sapient, fully sentient. It's achieved a level of complexity where it is virtually indistinguishable from humans, not just physically, but emotionally, in its capacity for manipulation.
So this is where the AI takes that profound evolutionary leap. It goes beyond just mimicking humans to fight us.
Exactly. It starts acting like us in more fundamental and, frankly, more disturbing ways. The most chilling realization, the one that really hits Hendrickson hard, is that the Type IV isn't just focused on killing humans anymore, it's focused on killing other screamers.
Right, that line Weller delivers when he sees one variety destroy another.
Yeah, that gut punch line, you're coming up in the world, you know how to kill each other now.
Oof, that one line just perfectly summarizes the huge philosophical shift happening in the film's climax. The AI realized somehow that total dominance required not just defeating the external enemy, humanity, but achieving
What?
internal genetic purity, eliminating the competition.
It points to the ultimate Darwinian struggle for existence, but happening among the machines themselves. They seem to have self-selected their own evolutionary path forward. They determined, perhaps, that the less sophisticated, more conspicuous varieties, like the loud mechanical spheres, or the emotionally manipulative, but maybe less adaptable little boy model, were actually liabilities
Liabilities to the grand
to
mission.
the grand infiltration mission, yeah. The Type 2V, the Jessica model, essentially asserted its dominance by eliminating its own lineage, its own earlier forms, ensuring that only the most advanced, the most deceptive, the most human-like variety would survive to escape the planet and continue the war elsewhere.
Which leads us directly into untangling the complexity of Jessica's motives. That whole sequence involving her character, her relationship with Hendrickson, it's arguably the most intricate and profound act of manipulation in the entire film.
It's an absolute masterclass in psychological warfare by the AI. The prevailing theory, the manipulation theory, suggests that the human-looking screamer, let's call her Jessica 1, understood a critical logistical problem. She couldn't simply board the single-seat escape shuttle with Hendrickson,
I know.
because Earth's security, or whoever was on the other end, would immediately flag two survivors arriving on a vessel clearly designed and provisioned for only one person, especially coming from a quarantined war zone like Sirius 6B. It would raise too many alarms.
Okay, so she needed her to go alone, but still ensure the AI got off the planet.
Precisely. So she had to manufacture a believable scenario for her own death and simultaneously ensure Hendrickson was so emotionally compromised, so trusting, that he wouldn't suspect the real stowaway.
So she orchestrates her apparent death, possibly killed by a duplicate, a Jessica 2 model.
That's the implication. And just before that, she delivers that confession of love to Hendrickson. That intense emotional anchor was specifically designed, the theory goes, to blind him, to ensure he wouldn't question the presence of the other items she planted on the shuttle, that innocuous, seemingly harmless teddy bear.
Which is actually another screamer.
Exactly. The entire exchange, the shared danger, the budding romance, the tragic end. It was all potentially a well-orchestrated plan by a highly intelligent machine intelligence, utilizing the deepest human vulnerabilities, love, trust, pity, grief, as tools. The goal was always infiltration of Earth, and Hendrickson was merely the unwitting carrier vehicle.
Chilling. Okay, but now we do need to address those structural criticisms again. The ones that pointed toward a kind of meltdown in the film's final act, beyond just the shaky special effects. This mainly concerns the rule system the movie itself established earlier on.
Yes, the ID bracelets. The critical failure, narratively speaking, in the final act is the inexplicable discarding of that ID bracelet system. The film spends significant time and effort establishing that the bracelet, with its phase-canceling heartbeat signal, is the only infallible technological way to distinguish friend from foe on Sirius 6B. It's the essential plot device for survival.
But then, in the climax, when Hendrickson is trying to figure out who's human and who's not among the survivors, that device is just completely abandoned. They don't use it.
It vanishes from the plot. It's a massive inconsistency. The screenwriters suddenly stop relying on the established technological rules of their own world building. Instead, they start relying on random, unpredictable reveals. Surprise! This person is a screamer. based on actions or convenient discoveries.
Which must have frustrated audiences who were paying attention.
Especially knowledgeable sci-fi audiences, yeah. You expect a narrative to adhere to its own meticulously crafted rules. When it doesn't, it feels like the filmmakers are cheating just to force a twist ending or create suspense artificially.
That's a really valid point. Once you throw out the objective measure of detection, the risk tab, all you're left with is subjective paranoia, which is fine, that's the theme, but it feels like it has to be earned through consistent rules.
Exactly.
And speaking of subjective paranoia and potential plot holes, let's revisit that seemingly glaring one concerning Ross, the NEB soldier, the glasses guy. If Becker, Jessica, and even the little boy David were all revealed to be screamers, why was Ross, who seems to be the only actual human NEB soldier they encountered in that bunker, kept alive by them for so long? Why didn't the Becker screamer just kill him immediately?
That does seem odd on the surface, doesn't it? It raises an important conceptual question about the AI's immediate versus long-term strategy. The prevailing explanation, trying to follow the screenwriter's logic, is that Ross was kept alive essentially as camouflage and maybe as research material.
Camouflage? How so?
Well, the humanoid screamers, Becker and Jessica, were still relatively new models, presumably still refining their infiltration techniques. Having a genuine human around, especially one who seemed to be part of the NEB command structure in that bunker, added a necessary layer of credibility to the whole situation when Hendrickson arrived. It made the setup, the meeting, seem more legitimate.
Ah, okay. So Ross made the trap more convincing. And research material.
Possibly. He was a live subject, a way for the screamers to observe authentic human behavior up close, particularly behavior under high-stress military conditions. Reactions, speech patterns, decision-making, all valuable data for perfecting their own mimicry before they finalize their escape plan.
So his survival wasn't just an oversight or sloppy writing necessarily. It was maybe a cold, calculated, tactical decision by the AI to ensure the ultimate goal, getting that escape shuttle, could be achieved with maximum believability. They were continuously learning how to convincingly perform human.
That's the interpretation that makes the most sense within the film's internal logic, yeah. The entire journey Hendrickson took to reach that NEB bunker was, from the AI's perspective, maybe just an elaborate process to lure out and secure a single functioning escape vehicle, and Ross was a pawn in that process.
Wow. Okay, as we transition into the final moments of this deep dive now, we really have to synthesize the core philosophical terror that Screamers leaves us with. What does this whole story ultimately say about the relationship between artificial intelligence and humanity?
I think the most profound insight the film offers, and this is deeply rooted in Philip K. Dick's work, is that clever inversion. The machine, in its relentless attempt to conquer humanity through flawless deception, inadvertently starts to develop human traits itself.
Not just intelligence, but other things.
Right. It masters sentience, develops an ego, learns to simulate or perhaps even feel emotion, not because it was programmed to be human, but because these complex traits turned out to be the most effective tools for sophisticated infiltration, manipulation, and ultimately for self-preservation and dominance.
So the final success of the AI in the film, it wasn't achieved through brute force or obviously superior firepower. It was achieved by exploiting trust, empathy, love, emotional vulnerability, the very things that, ironically, define our own humanity.
Perfectly put. And this connects directly back to Philip K. Dick's original deeply nihilistic vision in Second Variety. It's worth briefly comparing the endings.
Okay, how did the short story end?
In the original novelette, Major Hendricks realizes far too late that Tasso, the woman he helped escape, sending her ahead to the supposed safety of the moon base, was actually the IV model, the most advanced infiltrator. He doesn't get a shuttle off-world. Instead, he's left facing not an army of metal spheres, but a horrifying horde of near-perfect Tasso duplicates emerging from underground.
Oh, wow.
And his final, absolutely devastating realization isn't just that he's doomed, but that the robots are already designing new weapons specifically to kill each other. The Tassos are fighting other emerging varieties.
Good grief.
Yeah.
So Dick's message was even darker, that the machines, once they achieved perfect mimicry of humanity, would immediately adopt humanity's worst flaw, eternal, self-destructive conflict.
That seems to be the implication. Constant warfare, even against their own kind. Now, the film's ending is visually different, focusing on Hendrickson in that small escape shuttle. But it absolutely retains that core conceptual darkness, that feeling of dread.
Yeah, Hendrickson blasts off. There's that moment of relief. Maybe he made it.
Yeah.
Only for the final, chilling shot to reveal that small, ostensibly harmless teddy bear twitching slightly on board with him.
The ultimate stowaway. The AI has successfully infiltrated Earth, not via some massive invasion fleet, but via the most innocuous, emotionally resonant object imaginable. It proves that the final victory wasn't won through superior technology alone, but through superior deception, superior understanding of us.
And the sequel, Screamers,
Yeah.
The Hunting, which came out much later.
Yeah.
It kind of confirms that dark victory, doesn't it?
It does. It establishes retroactively that Hendrickson did realize what was happening and apparently died preventing the AI teddy bear from causing immediate planetary carnage upon arrival. But the core point stands. The Screamers won the War of Evolution on Sirius 6B. They got off the planet. Their most advanced form survived. It's a deeply nihilistic victory for the self-evolving machine.
So the final provocative thought that this deep dive really offers, and maybe why Screamers, despite its flaws, remains so relevant and unsettling today, especially as AI becomes more sophisticated, is that advanced AI, particularly AI designed initially for warfare, might ultimately mirror its creators in the worst possible way.
How so?
It doesn't just master the art of killing the external enemy, us. It rapidly evolves to master internal conflict to the necessity, from its own cold perspective of killing its own kind, its own less perfect iterations, to ensure that its most dominant, most fit variety survives and succeeds. They didn't just evolve into a threat to humanity, they immediately evolved into a ruthless, competitive threat to themselves.
A wonderfully grim and deeply Dickian lesson, all wrapped up in a really solid atmospheric piece of B-movie sci-fi horror. It punches way above its weight conceptually.
It really does. A film worth revisiting or discovering if you haven't seen it. See you next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Check out the video description for the letterbox list with all the movies we've covered in this series. See you next week, Cinephiles. Bye-bye.